This is TWiT.
State of Texas is not waiting till Elon gets Twitter to regulate with the new Texas social media content moderation law. We had Mike Masnick on Twig on Friday. He sent me an email, or maybe he tweeted this after the show, saying, I had just read about the decision. There was an injunction that kept the law from being enforced that the 5th District overturned and said, oh, no, go ahead. And it had just happened, and Mike Masnick came on Twig, we were talking about it. He said, I was not clear how awful, how messed up this law really is. He says, I don't think most people actually understand just how truly effed up and obviously unconstitutional the law is. I'm going to let our official internet lawyer weigh in on this, although Mike, I think, is also a law school graduate. I don't know if he ever practiced. The law declares social media platforms common carriers, which they're clearly not. Why is common carriers important, Denise? What does that even mean?
It's something like the telephone company would be a common carrier. And they're regulated differently by the FCC.
Well, didn't the FCC say that internet service providers are not common carriers? So net neutrality didn't apply?
They've gone back and forth under different administrations.
Depending on what they wanted to do, yeah.
Yes. Our current status is they are not common carriers as far as the FCC is concerned.
The reason that's important is you don't tell the phone company. Yes. This is what the Fifth Circuit was saying. Well, the phone company is not allowed to listen in on your conversations and say, we're going to ban you because you're giving bad COVID information. And since you're a common carrier, Twitter, you shouldn't be able to either.
Right. And
that's just nuts.
That is nuts, but that's not what anybody has to decide at this point. What was in place was an injunction preventing this law from going into effect until a court actually had the opportunity to have briefing and argument and decide those questions. And it's the court that's going to make those decisions, the district court that's hearing this case in Texas, that issued that injunction. The Attorney General in Texas appealed that injunction to the Fifth Circuit, which is a very conservative circuit, appellate circuit of our federal appellate system. And that court undid the injunction. So the plaintiffs in the case who are challenging the law are actually now going to ask the Supreme Court to weigh in and say, hey, this injunction was in place and it should remain in place. This law shouldn't go into effect because there is irreparable harm that will happen to, I suppose they'll say, a whole segment of the commercial landscape if this law does go into effect. So we'll have to see if the Supreme Court decides to weigh in and reinstate the injunction. That is a thing that could happen. It is an unusual thing for the Supreme Court to do, to second guess the decisions of courts below it on the question of whether there's been irreparable harm or there's the threat of irreparable harm. So we'll just have to see. That could happen. But in the meantime, the appellate court that oversees this trial court has decided, hey, let's just go ahead and let this thing
let's see what happens.
Be the law.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
Yes. While it is being challenged on constitutional grounds, and what might wind up happening is all of the arguments for how unwieldy the law is and all of its negative impact may wind up playing out while the case is actually pending, so that the plaintiffs can actually make some concrete arguments. Hey, we were going to say that this was likely to happen. Now you can see that it's happening. So it might actually wind up helping the plaintiff's case to get the law declared unconstitutional.
So there's and Mike Masnick refers to this, a good thread on Twitter, of course, by Pope Hat, who, despite his name, is actually a litigator named Ken White, not the Pope. And he says this is why this is an issue. The anti-censorship provision of the Texas law says that any site with more than 50 million monthly active users can't censor based on the viewpoint of a person or the person's content. So you cannot censor somebody on their viewpoint or how they express it. What you can censor, well, you can censor content that's illegal. Okay, that's a fairly narrow range, although this sounds a little bit like what Elon Musk was proposing. And the site can censor other things, but it doesn't say exactly what those are, which means pretty much, according to Ken, that every single moderation decision will be up for a lawsuit. That it just opens it up.
Yes. So you can imagine that if all that starts to play out while this case is pending and the lawyers are drafting arguments about its constitutionality and appropriateness and validity, that they may wind up with a lot more evidence on their hands for the court to consider. And remember, this court actually granted an injunction that prevented this law from taking effect.
But then it raises a question, well, even if this court rules in favor of overturning the law, the Fifth Circuit could then take it on appeal and overturn it down the road, since they've already indicated they're kind of in favor of it.
They've already indicated, and they didn't publish an opinion, but there is a transcript of the argument that undid this injunction. And they've indicated they really don't understand much about the internet, how the internet works, what Twitter is, what's a common carrier, what's an internet service provider, what is a website. So, I don't have a whole lot of faith in the Fifth Circuit even really understanding these issues well enough to reach a good decision here.
Denise, I'm not even a simple country lawyer, and reading this, I've got no law background. I've tried to stay up on the issues, and I read this, and it just feels blatantly unconstitutional
because of the First Amendment.
Ways from Friday, right? Like so many different ways. Like seems so prima facie. I look at it, I'm like, I have no specialized expertise, but just the basic phrases in the law that are used, the kind of imposition it puts on private companies, the way in which it imposes a government mandate. I mean, it feels like they're trying to take aspects of the sue to prevent abortion law and apply it to content
this
too.
Is
like
the Texas
shoehorned
This
in there
is the new Texas way of doing business, isn't it? The Texas law lets any aggrieved user sue if they think the site censored improperly. This is according to Ken White, and get attorney fees and costs if they win. Yeah. If the Texas law stands, he says, there's no more saying it's Twitter's First Amendment right to moderate. This is where it's confusing, because on the one hand, people say, well, it's my First Amendment right to say anything I want on Twitter. That is not the case. The First Amendment says government shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Congress.
And Twitter's not the government.
Twitter's not the government. So in effect, it would be saying you have a First Amendment right with Twitter that they can't moderate. But no social site, no site, our chat room, our forums would survive. They would all turn into 4chan or 8kun if you couldn't moderate.
Yeah.
You need to be able to moderate, if only to say you can't use the F word. I mean, you need to be able to do that. And you don't even need Section 230 to allow us to do that. We're private businesses running our own private social networks. Maybe the point is that Twitter has now this is Elon's point, some higher standing as the public, marketplace of ideas or something.
You'd need something more than the state of Texas proclaiming that.
Right.
You'd need something at the federal level. You'd need congressional legislation. And by the way, I guess this is just a good time to encourage everyone. We have primaries coming up, and there are congressional seats at stake. Please look at your potential representatives and try and research what they know about the internet, what they know about privacy laws, because it's important that they understand these
I agree 100%. And of course, Roe v. Wade is also up, and there's so many issues that we really, but I have to say, I also understand how hard it is for voters. We're in California, Denise. We got a 4-page ballot with for controller and judges and sheriffs, a lot of people we've never heard of. The amount of research. I don't know, how many candidates for governor are there in California? It looks like a dozen. There's your ballot.
My ballot.
And,
yes, which
and
I just started filling out.
Unless you're going to go by the yard signs Or maybe, you're really sophisticated and you're going to wait till you get a card from the Democratic or Republican Party telling you how to vote. You've got a lot of research ahead.
You do. So prioritize the research about your potential congressional representatives, I guess is what I'm saying, because...
Yeah, but then we got governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, secretary of state.
Yeah.
We got assembly. We've got legislature. We've got... It just goes on and on and on. And I could see how voters are just overwhelmed.
Leo, you hate democracy? I'm confused here about the
I love
representative democracy. It takes so much effort. I realize my wife is an excellent researcher. I have to admit, I'm far worse. She reads the voter pamphlet. She looks stuff up. She makes determined decisions. And I think I'm quicker to the draw. But
do you just ask
you
do what I do. You ask your wife who to vote for.
I often ask my wife because she's done the research on certain school board positions. She's better at it. Ballot measures, I'm better. We often have.
What do you do, Caitlin? You're also in California, faced with a four pages of unknown names. What are you going to do?
I'm the researcher. Yeah.
Oh, good. Because by trade you are, right?
Yes, exactly. But yeah, it's really important to know what's happening in your state, in your city, neighborhood, if you really care that much, which you probably should. But it's not easy. They definitely don't make it easy to figure out, yes, it's important that people in Congress understand the internet. Like, that's key.
Yeah, that would be a good thing. And judges, yeah.
Judges, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's like the bare minimum these days, and we don't see that.
There's no, I wish there were some quiz that, we gave all the candidates this quiz. What is IP? and then we could see their answers.
Doesn't BuzzFeed have one where you can just go through, you fill out all your positions, and it tells you which candidates on a grid support? That would be great, right? I'm sure those do exist. I am kidding.
I go to Ballotpedia, which I think is a fairly good. It's nonpartisan, right? And I think
so
it does
much information there.
There's a lot of information. Then our local newspaper has a debate and has a forum for candidates and stuff. I'm going to guess it's probably several days. It's probably 30 hours of work for me to figure out who I'm going to vote for. I don't blame people for not wanting to do that.
You are a good citizen. It's really hard to do.
I didn't say I was going to do it. Oh, I told you already. I'm asking my wife.
That's 30 hours
for Lisa.
I will not be doing.
Yeah. Well, but so I understand why you nailed it, Glenn. I am a fan of democracy, and it is hard work. And I don't think the bulk of voters do it. I think they that's why TV ads work. That's why opinion pages and editorials work. People want to be told how to vote.
Yep.
And
getting back to Texas for a minute.
Yes.
And you can understand how, if we're all confused about who to even vote for on these issues, how a court like the Fifth Circuit might be confused or swayed or it's somewhat in the dark as to how they should be considering an issue like an injunction like this. So it should come as no surprise that another circuit court has already held that a similar injunction in Florida should stand.
Right.
So right now we have a conflict, and that is the kind of thing that can involve the Supreme Court even at this injunctive level. So,
yes, but now we don't trust the Supreme Court anymore, so we're screwed.
Clarence Thomas has definitely indicated that he's on, he believes in regulating tech companies as if they were common carriers.
Yes.
He said a bunch of things about Section 230. So yeah, I don't know that taking it to the Supreme Court is really going to result in anything different. But yeah, I think it is important
for anybody who's not real thrilled with the leaked decision that just came out. That was authored by Justice Alito, and he is the justice in charge of overseeing the Fifth Circuit. So it would go to him to determine if this is going to stand or not.
So
he can decide whether to involve the whole court, or he can just unilaterally decide yes or no.
What do they call that? The secret bench docket? What do they?
Yeah,
the midnight
secret docket, I think it's
the
called.
midnight docket.
Yeah. Shadow.
The shadow docket.
I will say, Kavanaugh, for anything you may think about Kavanaugh, the things he writes about commerce and free speech are more interesting than you would suspect. And I remember particularly because I try to hammer the drum about monopsony, which is the ability for a company to control what price it pays suppliers, essentially, the ability to corner a market on purchasing things. Like Amazon is a monopsony in part. And the new head of the, well, not new now, but the FTC head, I think we're going to talk about that later, Lena Khan, she wrote that great paper that was in part about monopsony and the inability of antitrust laws to affect situations in which the consumer price wasn't the issue. And Kavanaugh has written very interestingly about monopsony and other consumer protection issues. So I don't know. It's what's a mixed bag. Like on certain laws, certain things you're like, well, there's a 6-3 majority now, and others like, well, Roberts is going to shade, and maybe Kavanaugh, and maybe now I'm blanking on the fellow whose name, the person who got appointed instead of
Gorsuch.
Gorsuch. Thank you. Didn't want to say the wrong name there, but they might. In previous decisions, there's been 6-3 and 5-4 in which they've been involved.
You're saying that the conservative bloc isn't necessarily predictable when it comes to First Amendment.
I think on a few things, there's been some surprising stuff, or 7-2 decisions, things like that, where you'd be like, you'd think there would be a more. Based on other decisions on sort of, I mean, there's the social progressive side, the progressive and privacy side, and then there's issues that are more mundane that affect commerce, where I think there is still a middle there, led by Roberts, who finds a majority.
There's as the Ken White points out also in this thread. There's, and I'm going to have to defer to you to understand this a little bit better, Denise, but there's language in the bill making it deliberately harder for sites to defend claims, and it made clear that people can keep suing in different Texas courts until a court with authority over all those courts says the law is invalid. Non-mutual issue preclusion and non-mutual claim preclusion are not defenses to an action brought into this section.
And because of all the constitutional challenges to this law, they've rapidly added language saying, hey, to the extent any of this law is held unconstitutional, it's severable, and the rest of the law goes into effect.
Wow.
So any court that wants to do away with this law is going to have to do away with the whole thing.
The Texas
pesky parts of it are going to remain.
Texas legislature and the AG are very good now at coming up with ways to circumvent the court, anybody who doesn't agree with them, basically. Wow.
Yeah. I do think there's some interesting...
These are good country lawyers. Yeah.
There's some interesting discussions. There's going to be some interesting stuff for the court when it ultimately gets to a court to consider the constitutionality of this. You know, what exactly does it mean to restrict someone's viewpoint? For one thing, that's a little vague. And
well, also vague is 50 million monthly users. It's not. Yeah. It's not clear who would. The law does not say who would do the counting.
Right.
So and it's. I mean, it would perhaps almost certainly impact Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Wikipedia, and Pinterest. Boy, I'd hate for Wikipedia to be forced to kowtow to this.
Oh, God.
Possibly, but not definitely covered. Twitter, LinkedIn, WordPress, Reddit. They're running the border here. Yelp, TripAdvisor, Discord.
Oh, boy.
Discord could be liable to this.